Japan drinks more canned coffee than almost any country on earth. But researchers comparing afternoon energy crashes across office workers keep finding Japan near the bottom for reported fatigue, even with coffee machines on every block. That's backwards. By 3 in the afternoon, offices in New York and London are running on a second or third cup just to get through a meeting. So what's actually keeping people steady over there if the caffeine isn't doing the work? It comes down to 7 habits, and not one involves a supplement, an energy drink, or sugar. The first one is almost embarrassingly simple, and it starts right after lunch. In a lot of Japanese offices, especially outside the biggest cities, people don't sit back down at their desk the second the food is gone. They walk, not a workout, not a power walk with headphones in, just 10, maybe 15 minutes, often to a nearby shrine, a park bench, a convenience store 2 blocks over and back. It looks like nothing, but that short walk is doing something your body actually needs after a meal, because when you eat, your blood sugar rises, and if you sit still while it rises, it spikes hard and then crashes hard about 90 minutes later. That crash is the 2 o'clock wall. Almost everyone blames on needing more coffee, except the wall isn't a caffeine problem, it's a blood sugar problem, and a short walk after eating pulls glucose out of your bloodstream and into your muscles instead of letting it spike, which means there's no crash to recover from in the first place. There's a second reason that walk matters, and it has nothing to do with sugar. Sitting for 8 or 9 hours a day stiffens the hips and the lower back, and that stiffness alone raises resting muscle tension enough to make you feel physically drained before you've done anything demanding. A short walk resets that. Joint move, blood actually circulates through the legs instead of pooling, and blood pressure, which climbs slightly every time you sit still for long stretches, comes back down. You don't fix a roller coaster by adding more fuel. You fix it by never sending the car up that high to begin with, and that applies to blood sugar and to blood pressure at the same time. That's the surface level habit, the one anyone can copy tomorrow. But it's not the real reason energy stays steady all day, because a 15-minute walk doesn't explain why someone would still feel clear-headed at 6 in the evening. For that, you have to look at what's actually on the plate at breakfast. A traditional Japanese breakfast looked nothing like the cereal and toast routine a lot of Western households grew up on. Instead of cereal, toast, or a pastry, it's usually rice, grilled fish, or a piece of tofu, miso soup, and pickled vegetables. Notice what's missing. No refined sugar, no pastry dough, almost no fast digesting carb eaten alone. The fish and tofu bring protein and fat, and eating protein alongside carbohydrate slows down how quickly that carbohydrate hits your bloodstream. So instead of a sugar spike 30 minutes after breakfast followed by a crash before your first meeting even starts, blood sugar rises slowly and comes down slowly too. That's the difference between energy that ramps up and holds and energy that fires off like a flare and burns out an hour later. It also happens to be one of the reasons cholesterol numbers in Japan have historically run lower than in most Western countries. Fish instead of processed meat, fermented soy instead of butter, and sugar stacked on top of refined flour. Nobody eating that breakfast is thinking about their cholesterol panel. They're just not loading their bloodstream with the stuff that forces the liver to work overtime. And a liver that isn't overworked is one more system quietly not draining your energy in the background. And here's where it gets interesting, because that slow release breakfast isn't just about blood sugar and cholesterol. Miso soup, natto, pickled vegetables, all of it is fermented, which means every morning, without thinking about it, a huge percentage of the population is feeding their gut bacteria before they fed almost anything else. that matters more than it sounds like it should, because a decent chunk of the neurotransmitters your brain runs on, including the ones tied to alertness and mood, are either produced or regulated in the gut. A gut that's inflamed or out of balance doesn't just cause bloating, it's been linked to that foggy, low-grade, tired feeling that doesn't go away no matter how much you sleep. The kind people describe as thinking through wet cotton by mid-afternoon. So, the walk fixes the crash, the breakfast fixes the spike, but the fermented food is quietly working on something underneath both of those day after day for years. It's worth being specific about what that actually looks like inside the body. Natto, the sticky fermented soybeans a lot of Japanese households eat at breakfast, is loaded with a particular strain of bacteria that's been studied for its effect on gut lining integrity. A gut lining that's compromised, sometimes described as a leaky gut, lets small particles slip into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there, and the immune system responds to that the way it responds to any intruder, with inflammation. Low-grade, chronic background inflammation doesn't announce itself with a fever. It shows up as puffiness, joint achiness that doesn't match any injury, and that specific brand of tiredness that doesn't lift no matter how much you rest. Feed the gut lining well every morning, and there's simply less of that background noise for your energy to fight through all day. Now there's a drink involved in all this too, and it's not coffee. Green tea shows up constantly throughout the day in Japan, and it does contain caffeine, just far less per cup than coffee does. But it also contains an amino acid called L-theanine, and the two together produce something different than caffeine on its own. Instead of a sharp jolt followed by a hard drop, theanine seems to smooth out the caffeine curve, so the alertness comes on steadier and fades slower. It's a small thing, but swap 3 sugary energy drinks a week for unsweetened green tea, and you remove a source of blood sugar spikes without removing the mild lift people actually want from caffeine in the first place. There's another piece of this that has nothing to do with what goes in the body and everything to do with how the body moves before work even starts. Anyone who spent time in Japan has probably heard the little chime that plays over loudspeakers in some factories, schools, and older offices around 10 in the morning. It's called Radio Taiso, a 3-minute stretching routine that's been broadcast on national radio since the 1920s, and it hasn't really changed. Arms overhead, torso twists, light knee bends, shoulder rolls. On paper, it looks too small to matter, but joints that don't move for hours start to stiffen, and stiff joints send the brain a low-grade discomfort signal that reads as fatigue even when nothing is technically wrong. 3 minutes of movement every few hours keep that signal from ever building up, the same way the after lunch walk does, just a bit earlier and more often through the day. It's less about burning calories and more about never letting the body sit still long enough to start complaining. That habit alone wouldn't do much. But stacked on top of the walk after lunch, it means the body barely spends any stretch of the workday completely motionless. And motionless is where both the blood sugar crash and the joint stiffness come from in the first place. Still, none of that explains the mornings, because even with perfect blood sugar and a healthy gut, plenty of people wake up already exhausted, and that's where the next habit comes in, and it has almost nothing to do with food at all. Sleep in Japan runs shorter on average than in most Western countries. That part actually works against the theory. What seems to matter more than total hours is consistency, and specifically morning light. A lot of Japanese cities are built dense and low, which means a natural light hits bedrooms early, often before 7. And there's a cultural habit of opening curtains, opening windows, getting outside even briefly before the workday starts. That early light exposure does something your body clock depends on. It tells your brain that the day has officially begun, which triggers a hormone shift that's supposed to happen every single morning to make you feel alert. Skip that signal, and your body doesn't get the memo. It stays in a kind of gray zone between asleep and awake for hours, which a lot of people mistake for just being tired, when it's actually a body clock that never got told it was morning. That gray zone is also where brain fog tends to live. Not the dramatic kind, just the sense that your thoughts are half a step slower than they should be, that you're rereading the same email twice. A clock that never properly starts in the morning doesn't just cost you energy, it costs you the sharpness that's supposed to come with being awake in the first place. Which brings us to the real answer, the one underneath all 5 of the others, and it's the reason coffee never fully worked for afternoon energy to begin with. Every one of those habits, the after meal walk, the slow release breakfast, the fermented food, the unsweetened tea, the small stretch breaks, the morning light, is quietly managing the same hormone, cortisol. A lot of people only know cortisol as the stress hormone, the one tied to belly fat and high blood pressure when it's chronically elevated. But cortisol is meant to move through the day, not sit flat. It peaks in the morning, giving you that natural jolt of alertness, and then slowly taper down through the afternoon and evening. That's the actual energy curve your body was built to run on, not caffeine, cortisol. The problem is that skipping breakfast, sitting still after eating, missing morning light, and chronic low-grade stress all blunt that morning peak and flatten the curve. So instead of a clean rise and gentle fall, you get a weak, shaky signal that never really wakes you up and never really lets you wind down either. That's the fatigue people are actually trying to caffeine their way out of. And caffeine can't fix a broken rhythm. It can only mask it for about 90 minutes at a time, which is exactly why the crash always comes back. A flattened cortisol curve doesn't stay contained to just feeling tired either. Cortisol that stays elevated into the evening instead of tapering off is one of the reasons stubborn belly fat builds specifically around the midsection, because that hormone signals the body to store fat there over almost anywhere else. It's also part of why back pain and tight shoulders creep up on people who feel like they haven't done anything to earn them. Chronic elevated cortisol keeps muscle in a low-grade state of tension around the clock. The same tension a short walk or a calm morning is designed to interrupt. So the 7 habits aren't really 7 separate tricks. They're one system aimed at keeping cortisol doing what it was designed to do instead of fighting it with sugar and stimulants. A walk after lunch keeps blood sugar from forcing a stress response and keeps blood pressure from creeping up along with it. Short stretch breaks keep stiffness from ever building into a fatigue signal in its own right. A slow breakfast keep the morning peak clean instead of spiking it early, while keeping cholesterol numbers from working against you at the same time. Fermented food keeps the gut calm enough that it isn't quietly triggering inflammation, which itself raises cortisol and thickens the brain fog. Unsweetened tea removes the sugar spikes without removing the lift people actually want. And morning light sets the whole clock, so the peak happens when it's supposed to, not 3 hours late. None of this means coffee is the enemy. Plenty of people in Japan still drink it, and there's nothing wrong with a cup in the morning if you enjoy it, but it stops being the thing your whole day depends on once the rhythm underneath it is actually working. A lot of us were taught to treat low energy as a supply problem, something you solve by pouring more fuel in from the outside, another cup, another can, another scoop of something powdered. But a body with a broken rhythm doesn't run out of fuel. It runs out of a working signal to tell it when to be awake and when to rest, and no amount of caffeine can handwrite that signal back in. And that's really the question worth sitting with. How much of the tiredness we blame on not having enough coffee or not having the right supplement is actually just a body that's never been given the signal it needs to run its own clock. Because it's possible the fix was never about adding something stronger. It might have been about giving your body a reason to trust its own rhythm again. If any of these 7 habits stood out to you, or if there's one you want broken down further, the cortisol curve especially, let me know in the comments, because that's usually where this series goes next.